So last time we met, we were talking about how to sustain meditation, and that there was the time in the sessions and between the sessions. And I was thinking about that word sustain. It's like sustainability. It's kind of a buzzword right now, but it's nice to think about what we're doing with these, with our time, what we're trying to hold in our lives. And then of the meditation session, we were talking about the first part, which is the preparation, not the actual session or the conclusion. But in the preparation, there were 6 preparatory practices from Sri Lingpa, and we talked about the first 2. So that's kind of where we are. So we talked about cleaning the shrine room and arranging the altar or the shrine. And we talked about making offerings. So then the third one is, I break it into 3A and 3B because it's so long. And just, I'm trying to do this from my own perspective. There's a lot you can read about this, but because this is a practice I use every day, I really actually focus on the first 3, and then a lot of times I'll use the sadhana for the last 3, depending on what I'm doing. But when I use the abbreviated recitations, then it's really easy to do all of them in the order that they're presented. And I love all 6 steps of this. I think it's very beneficial for me to have a more productive meditation session, which is the point. So the third one is actually to sit in the correct meditation posture, and I say it to myself, observe the mind. So I always say to myself, sit in the Vajrachana position and observe the mind. And then the second half of that is take refuge and generate bodhicitta. And so I'm calling 3A the sitting in the posture and observing your mind, which is actually a quite important part of getting in, because so far all we've done is clean the room and made the offerings. Now we've sat down, and it's how do you sit and what do you first do? And that kind of leads your session in my experience. If I rush, the session will be rushed. If I slow down and really get into this, then the whole session is better. So that's the point of these. So in terms of the posture, it's the Vajra position, and it's the 7-point position of Buddha Vajrachana. So the first one, the point of this is to have a very stable position, and in this position, you're actually, the Vajra position, your left foot is on the right thigh, the right foot is on the left thigh, the right hand is on the left, the palms are up, your thumbs are touching, and they're about at the navel or in your lap. And then your shoulders are level, your back is straight, which is quite important, probably the most important of everything. And then your head is just slightly inclined, your lips and your teeth in a very natural position, with the tongue at the tip of the tongue at the palate or on the, actually for me, I just use the word mine, M-I-N-E. When you say that word, mine, your tongue usually goes to the right place. You kind of gently hold that without a lot of tension. And then with your eyes, you're gazing down kind of beyond the nose. You're actually not really looking at anything. And so this is the 7 parts of this position, and it's the recommended position to cultivate serenity. With this, in terms of the eyes, if your eyes shut, that's fine, but you generally try to keep them open, letting more light in so you don't get drowsy. And a well-lit room can help that as well. So that's some about the posture. So basically, when you think about it more generally, you're in a position that's firm but relaxed. And it's very important to be upright. Darshan Rinpoche used to say, when the channels are straight, the mind will be straight. And actually, Pabonka Rinpoche says something similar with slightly different words, a little more a tantric explanation. It's actually, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has some interesting advice, which I thought was worth kind of bringing up here. If you tend to rock, move around, then your mind will tend to wander more. You're trying to actually sit still. And he told a story about a Geshe who was a yogi who had lived in Tibet, and then in the mountains of Tibet, and then he came out finally to India, and he requested initiations, and he didn't move at all during the whole initiation. He just was like, there. And what His Holiness said about that is, if you can do that, you should do that. And it comes from the strength of having like this absorbed concentration. So that was, I always found that interesting. So sometimes you hear the 8 points of Vairocana. So instead of 7-point position, you hear 8. And Paboka Rinpoche explains this the best. And this is, I think, for me, one of the most important parts of this. The 8th point is to do breathing meditation. And I'll just read the way they describe this in his book. Adopting the 8-featured sitting posture, or whatever position is convenient for you, on a comfortable seat, and then taking refuge, developing bodhicitta, and so on, in an especially virtuous frame of mind, making sure that these practices properly suffuse your mind stream. So he just, in this short thing, kind of introduces the whole 3rd step. And so this thing about observing the breath is not always necessary to do. It's something I always do. And in retreat, the mind gets calm, and you don't really often have to spend a lot of time with this, because what you're looking for at that point is you're trying to get the mind, you want to have a virtuous state of mind to really be able to make really good use of your session. But maybe the mind isn't like that. So if there's, by at that point, doing some breathing meditation, gives you a chance to look at your mind, see where you are, see what you need to do to kind of prepare for the session. What do you need to kind of get out of there, and what do you need to bring in? And the way he describes it, which is actually, I think, exactly how I experience it, is, of course, when you watch the breath, you're focusing the mind on that object, but you actually can observe the mind with, as one master said, like 25% of your attention is kind of watching your mind in a way. You're kind of aware of all of that at once, even though your attention is on the focal object, what you're paying attention to, maybe the breath as it goes in and out of the nose, the rising and falling of the belly, whatever. But if you notice that your mind is agitated, then you want to do the breathing meditation for a while to at least get your mind in neutral. And both Geshe Sopa and Pabonka Rinpoche talk about this. And this is something that when I first lived here, I found extremely helpful when I read that, because I might, to tell you the truth, during this phase, you actually then cultivate your motivation. And sometimes early on, like I remember one year I asked Venerable, I'm spending like 45 minutes at the beginning of the session just working on my motivation, using the Lam Rim, just working on my mind. And she said, go for it, that's fine. And I think that was so helpful for me to hear that. And then at one point she told me, at a minimum, because in retreat your mind gets really calm and you don't have to spend so much time, there's not so much stimulation. She said, well, at least do 10 breaths. And that's what I always do. I at least do 10. So I take the time to help me transition, to see if I'm trying to be rushing, to see where I am, just where am I at? And I would say for me, that would be the minimum. And then I spend the time I need to. Otherwise, you might go through this. Well, actually, let me back up. If your mind is in a non-virtuous state, the mental factors are also, like everything's kind of in that same track. And if you get it to neutral, you have a chance then to bring it to a more virtuous state. But for me, it was hard to go from a non-virtuous state to a virtuous state. I was just like, this isn't working. I could say, like, maybe I have anger and I apply the antidote, and I'm supposed to have this wonderful feeling. Or actually, jealousy was the harder one. Like, you're supposed to go to rejoicing. I couldn't get that to work. I used some verses from Nagarjuna that really helped me a lot more with that. And I think it got my mind a little more neutral. Then I could maybe think about rejoicing. So I had to find what worked for myself. So that's I think one of the very important point, to make some time at the beginning of your session, which is why we have the 5 minutes at the beginning of our meditation sessions when we do it as a group. So if you don't do that, you might just mechanically go through saying the verses. I take refuge, I generate bodhicitta, and da-da-da-da-da, whatever you say, but it's not sinking in. It's not, it's just the mouth moving. You haven't gotten yourself there, and that's actually not that useful, maybe some imprints, but you want to try to feel these verses. You want to try to make your mind into those things, into those states. So yeah, it's easier when you do it that way. And so if you actually if you're having difficulty and you look at your motivation, then you can kind of see like, oh, what is really running my mind right now? And you can clean it up. That's what I love about, setting motivations, is that you might start with a good motivation when you're doing something, and then it kind of falls apart, but you can actually clean it up and recharge it, and that's worth a lot. So that's what I can do. You can do in this session too. And of course, just the general points of you breathe naturally, noiselessly. Essentially, you're not trying to do a lot of forcing of the breath. And if you get distracted, you just gently bring your mind back to the breath. So I think that's mostly what I wanted to say about this, and I think that's enough for today. Next time we'll go into the second half of this, which is the taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Thank you.